It's the Liars Club Oddcast, a weekly conversation filled with insights, tips, and secrets from the myriad of creative people who make stuff up for a living. Stay tuned and you could hear from New York Times bestselling authors, National Book Award finalists, debut novelists, screenwriters, musicians, composers, cartoonists, actors, stand-up comedians, line tamers, and all manner of creators who burn the midnight oil and sometimes their dinner. Whether you're a reader or a fellow writer, join us as we plumb the depths of the creative process for inspiration, semi-plausible stories, and a few laughs. So grab a libation, sit back, and spend some quality time with the creative folks who make stuff up for a living in a lively conversation with the Liars Club. All right, ladies and gentlemen, here we are again. We are currently trying to herd cats and writers and everybody to the Liars Club Oddcast because once again, we're trying to start one off. We are here with the second of our offerings of our Summer's Writers Block Party. And the second one in our offering here is setting. So research was our beginning one, and that was sort of, we talked about that being the base of what we do and why it supports everything we do as a writer. Why did we jump to setting as our second choice here?
I think seems like a logical extension from research, but go ahead, John.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, I think it's one of those essential decisions that you have to make, apart from anything else, before you get too deep into your story, because it provides the context. The setting really does, that is the context of your story. So, the same story in a different setting is going to mean something very different. And of course, no matter where you go.
There you are.
There you are.
There was a joke there.
There was a joke there. Well, of course, that's very true because Moby Dick set on the Staten Island Ferry would be a very different book. Mm-hmm. Right?
It's true.
Exactly. I always ask when I read beginners manuscripts, it's always the question I say, where am I? Where am I? Like it's a very basic mistake, even among good writers. So I think focusing on it is super important, more important than people think.
Yeah.
But it affects everything. It affects your language. It affects interaction, what the details are, what they're wearing, everything, the climate. It's when it is, not just where it is.
You're going to have a different conversation between two characters at a cocktail party than you are at two characters in the woods. It's actually going to change the way they talk to each other. So,
right.
Yeah. If you've got
you two fight it out.
At the cocktail party in the 19th century is different than in the 22nd century. Too.
Or California versus,
East Coast or New York.
So, exactly.
Yeah, right.
And a cowboy, on the South Dakota plains is much different than a cowboy at Studio 54.
Very much so. Very much.
I was waiting for your punchline.
I
thought you were going to go Times Square. But
I'm waiting for him to break into YMCA.
The naked cowboy. Is the naked cowboy still in Times Square?
I think not during the pandemic.
Not during a pandemic. Exactly right. So I think, and I actually think Greg was you. I think in the one that we're about to listen to, I think you actually even referred to the setting as another character in the book almost.
Yeah.
I think
Yes.
You said
well,
that.
especially in fantasy fiction, science fiction, historical fiction, it really is. It really has that much depth and shade there.
All right, so we understand why it's important. Obviously, like research, it sort of permeates the whole thing and supports the whole thing. So let's move on then and take a listen to what we have to say about, let's listen to those liars talking about setting, shall we?
What did we say?
What did we say? Here we go.
Hello. Some more helium, please.
What did we decide to talk about?
Setting.
All right. So here we are, ladies and gentlemen. We are once again back with the Liars Club Oddcast and one of our roundtables because we couldn't find a guest this week, so that's what we had to do.
And that is being spelled with a T this time, right? Round table?
I don't think so.
Roundable.
So Liars Club
Roundable. We might keep that. I like that, actually.
I thought you meant guest with a T as opposed to guest.
Instead of beer. Guess.
Yeah, well, that's what we're talking
Our
about.
guest for the week is we don't know who it is.
Or what we're
Kelly's
talking
leaving.
about.
She took off
Sorry,
her.
the dog has to go inside.
So Kelly is leaving because she has to let the dog out.
Speaking of setting, the dog needs to go outside.
So if you want to complicate your setting, put a dog in it.
Yes.
Because that way the owner has to take that dog out for a walk periodically. It's all what's referred to as fifth business in theater, which is to say you've got the dialogue, you've got people talking to each other, but fifth business is what they're doing physically while they're talking to each other. And that brings in setting because you've got to have something there for them to be interacting with, or furniture for them to be falling over, or a dog that needs to be walked or something like
And
that.
they need to be somewhere.
Exactly. It creates dimensionality for the conversation isn't happening in a vacuum.
But setting isn't only place, or it's also time, and it's also the rules of the place that are understood by the characters. So if, for example, they're in Nazi Germany, the rules are different than if they're...
Much different.
Yeah.
Then what?
It's harder to walk the dog, for one thing.
Well, they're different than if they're walking on the moon. You know, it's different.
That's really hard to walk the dog.
It's true.
Yeah.
I think that, character, I think, is generally the most important thing in fiction. I mean, other stuff doesn't really matter as much. I think plot is, probably of secondary importance, but setting is really important. And I think a lot of people don't give that much, sense to it. And I think that in some works, if a setting is, right up front and part of the color, if you have like a really compelling setting, people say, oh, well, that's part of the color of the book, it's part of the flavor, it really is important. But I think that even in works where it's almost irrelevant, I think it really helps for the writer to have in mind what the setting is for internal consistency, so that you're not contradicting yourself, that things are kind of consistent in the background.
But John, you say character is more important. I've heard, and I sort of agree, that setting, in a sense, is character. And in that, the characters act upon each other, and the plot comes from their actions that affect each other. And setting affects every one of the characters and interacts with them.
It does. It gives them context, too, right?
There's a very... I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
No, there's a very basic acting exercise you do with new actors, where you put them in an improv and you say, okay, so you give them a set text, which is a very basic sort of 4-line text. Hi, what are you doing here? I thought you told me to be here. I didn't. Okay, so that's like a basic script that could be anywhere, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
So it's interesting. And then you say, okay, you take that and you give them who they are and what their point of view is, but then you change the settings. So you say, okay, now you're on a subway,
Right.
a subway platform.
Right.
Now you're in the library.
Right.
Now you're hiding in a closet and your parents might discover the two of you, right? So that changes the dynamic of the conversation, even a simple conversation like that.
Drastically.
Exactly.
Well, that's sort of what I was trying to say before when I said the Nazi Germany versus the moon
exactly
thing.
Right.
It's
Exactly right, because it does change it.
Yeah.
Because it changes a conversation, even a simple conversation that seems very innocent in a Nazi fascist world. Suddenly it's not, especially if someone sitting over there might be part of the Nazi youth and we're not sure.
Right.
So
Or they're taking notes while you're...
Right, exactly.
Yeah, right.
Sorry.
I was going to say that I feel like beginning writers make a lot of mistakes in setting. Like I see a lot of what I consider to be errors in setting, in that there's too much or there's nothing. Mm-hmm. Like, so you see all this description of place and weather and blah 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 blah, and none of the other stuff woven through. That's a rookie mistake. And the other thing I see is I read it and I'm like, I don't know where I am, dude. Mm-hmm. Like I have no idea what day it is. I have no idea what street I'm on. I have no idea. Yep. I have no idea. You have not landed me anywhere. So I think it's truly important.
Yeah, there's a lot of advice in writing books that says essentially that beginning writers fail to understand that if you want to invoke the universal in readers,
be specific.
You have to be specific. They're afraid of being specific because they think that'll make it so specific that nobody will identify with or understand what I'm doing. And they need to do exactly the opposite.
They're worried about being so descriptive, like they're, and getting it all X'd out, but there's that in-between feeling.
But it's also, like Kelly said, in saying too much, you're losing the flow. But what you want to do is just give just enough to suggest so that the reader can fill in
the blanks. They have enough and their mind fills it in.
I think a lot of times writers are kind of reluctant to put a lot of detail in because they think it's going to be an expository dump. And I don't think a lot of times it is.
Yes.
Yeah.
So the way you avoid that is by having the characters interact with the setting and explain it that way. You know, make it part of the story, make it part of the characters' actions.
Yeah, and that goes back to what I was saying about fifth business. That's what they're doing is interacting with where they are. Yeah.
There's an exercise that I do in some of my classes where I take the setting and then change the character's attitude, because there's internal setting as well. And your mood and your attitude toward the setting.
You just killed your microphone.
That was so interesting.
And it was a very internal setting.
Shunk right into
It hits you right here.
The characters' feelings and emotions and experiences will color their perceptions of the setting and therefore their relationship to the setting. So if you have a character in the same spot before their breakup and after their breakup, they're going to see two different places, even though it's the same place.
Absolutely, and that goes back to the interaction of setting and character, right? And you know, the way that the character observes the setting says as much about the character as it does about the setting.
Yep.
Absolutely.
I've heard a phrase a lot, and I've actually heard you guys talk about it.
Shut up, John.
That phrase comes up every time.
But see, I know what that phrase means. Shut up, John. No, you talk about world building.
Yes.
So obviously it has to do with setting, but I'm probably just setting's a part of world building. What does that phrase actually mean?
Well, it means the same thing for everybody, regardless of whether you're writing contemporary fiction or genre fiction. But in the genres of science fiction, fantasy, historical fiction in particular, world building becomes critically important. And what Mary was saying earlier about your setting becoming an extra character is exactly the way most people describe world building in genre fiction, because we haven't been there before. If I write a story in New York City, I don't have to do a lot of world building because everybody kind of has an idea of New York City from movies, from books, from stories. Mm-hmm. But if I'm setting a story in the 24th century, nobody's been there. If I'm setting a story in the 12th century, nobody lives there. So I have to find stuff in that real world that paints that world for you very quickly, because I don't want an expository dump like John is saying. I don't want 5 pages of let me tell you about 12th century Scotland. I have to make that period come to life in some way.
If you're setting something in a contemporary, in a setting that people are familiar with, there's all this shorthand you can do. You can just drop a name, you can drop a place name, whatever, and it evokes everything you want to evoke.
It becomes a telling detail because it's doing all the work.
And it becomes lots of telling details.
Yeah,
right, exactly, the telling detail. But when you're creating the world, you have to establish all that. So world building, and you have to do it without, as you said, without these huge exposition dumps. So it's tricky, and it's really important because the reason that you're setting your story in this place is because that's where it has to be. So if the story has to be there, you have to put the reader there in order to understand the story, and you have to do it without being clumsy and right.
And the rules of the place have to be understood by the characters, even if you haven't listed them for the reader, so that they're obeying things that they know and they're following rules that they know, even before the reader may know why. It brings to mind Leslie Banks, one of our former colleagues who passed away, unfortunately. She had built a whole world of African-American vampires who were and essentially she wrote erotic vampire fiction. And the rules of this hierarchy that went back generations was understood by all the characters. Then they followed traditions and had relationships and the rules of the relationships that were so intricate that she had charts on the wall to remind herself. And yet her readers knew because it was specific and consistent throughout her books.
And that's an important thing for people to think about, because as ridiculous as that may sound, her vampires are not like Jonathan Mayberry's vampires in V-Wars. They're not like the vampires in Richard Matheson's I Am Legend. So you can't just take, you can, but who wants to read it? Stock, boring, you've seen it before vampires and just fling them into your fiction. With
what do you mean?
Yeah, exactly. I don't care. With no rules to go by, so that you can't just go, here they are and I'm going to change the rules as I go along. It doesn't make any difference. You actually have to think about which ones are you playing with? Which of the things we think we know about vampires, for instance, are you using? And which things are you throwing out and saying, that's nonsense, that's not going to be part of this story, it's going to be something else.
And I think, ideally, you're going to have millions of readers and they're going to pore over every detail and they're going to know exactly how this world works. But even if they don't, I think that you as the writer have to understand the world that you're writing in, and stick to it, and be internally consistent. Because I think that even if, the readers might not say, oh, wait a second, on page 67 you said this, but on page 320 you said this. Sometimes they'll pick up on it if something's inconsistent. But a lot of times, even if they don't pick up on it, there's just a sense that things aren't quite right.
Yeah.
And I think that it's an easily overlooked thing, but readers will pick up on it.
So how do you create that nuance? I mean, you talk about different worlds that you're all talking about.
Right.
There are overarching and broad strokes, but like, for example, Nantucket is a very specific part of the world. And it's got subtleties to it that I've never been to Nantucket.
Right.
I wouldn't understand necessarily.
Right.
So how do you make sure that they get in there without sort of bonking without going to the exposition dump like you were talking about?
Well, I mean, readers, no matter what they're reading, they do want to enter a world. They want to go somewhere they haven't been before, even if it is a town or a state that's even maybe they visited or maybe they've only heard of it. But I've heard from several readers that my recent book, which is set in Nantucket, like that they felt very, very centered there after reading it. It became very alive in their minds. And I think that even though it's not that different than any other city in America, it does have different nuances, just as, New York or LA, and, just the way that people dress, the way the air smells, small details that do differentiate, and whether people have sandy feet.
And there you go. You're back to
It's
that.
like that. And,
Right.
and you say, Kelly, that people want to go away. A lot of times they want to stay home and read about their own city. And if you do write about a setting that they're familiar with, that your readers know, such as Philadelphia or Chicago, you better be darn careful about doing it right.
Yeah.
And getting the streets right. And
Right.
the building,
Right. Or you'll hear about it.
You will. You'll hear about
If
it.
you're not going to create it, you have to know it really well.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
To do your
And
research.
not fall into a stereotype, because there's a stereotype about New York, for example, that's not correct.
Well,
Right? I mean, any stereotype about
People
any
never
city.
sleeping.
The people being mean.
Yeah.
Hey, settle down.
so they do sleep in New York?
Well, but an agent or an editor is going
Some people.
to knock that out right away. If you are generalizing, if you're stereotyping, you got to find something new about a known place, and you got to enlighten people just a little bit, I think, or it's just like it's already in my head. Who wants that?
And the thing one thing you have to be really, really careful, is if you're writing about a real place and you get a detail wrong, the people that know that place, the people that know that detail, you've kind of lost them.
Yeah.
It can be a very, very minor detail.
Absolutely.
I had this nightmarish experience. I'd been asked to write a book that took place in another city, which I ended up moving to Philadelphia. But while I was working on the book, I saw this kind of toss away story. It was on, I had just written a scene that took place in a bar, and there's a story on CNN about, I think it was North Carolina, they were just about to change the law that stipulated that I think it was North Carolina, if you walked into a bar and you asked for a mixed drink, if you wanted a rum and Coke, they would give you a glass of Coke and an airplane bottle of rum. And that was the law. And I was thinking, oh my God, if I had set this toss-away scene in this state, I would have gotten that totally wrong. I was having palpitations. I was terrified. Yeah. And that's the kind of detail
things,
you will lose everybody.
So research.
On this toss-away detail.
Research. And maybe visit the location if you can.
And actually, that sort of thing, I think, has kept a lot of science fiction writers in the past decade or so from writing near-future science fiction, because the world is changing so fast that by the time the story is in print, what you wrote about doesn't exist in the form it existed in at the time you wrote the story.
Absolutely. And I'm writing near future these days, so it's tricky as hell. You have to extrapolate out enough, but events can overtake you.
Yeah.
And even if you're doing in the near past, you have to remember, wait a minute, did they have cell phones yet that year? Did they have, boom boxes? It's like...
Right, or was it Walkman?
Right, exactly.
It is. Looking back, it's crazy. Looking back over the last 15, 20 years, trying to place a specific year in that continuum. And remember, the technology has been changing and society has been changing so quickly. It really is.
Yeah.
It's a challenge. You have to do almost the same kind of research as you would have had to with, deep historical fiction.
Yeah.
So setting includes not only where you are and when you are, but the things that are outside you that you're dealing with, like the props in the play, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And it is affected by the attitudes of the characters.
She's touching herself again.
Let's see if I can get that.
Stop it, man. Oh my God, I didn't want to see that.
So it's not an uncomplicated topic. It's got a lot of aspects to it.
Well, it's interesting. You're talking about props. So now how do you guys handle in a book that has 100,000 words or whatever, these large novels that you guys write?
We never do that.
You never do that. Mm-hmm. How do you handle small things like that? How do you keep track of small things like that?
A couple paragraphs at a time.
Well, I was just going to say, the other thing is keeping track of it when your standalone becomes a series.
Yeah.
And you realize that all these little details that you've put down in the first book and in the second book are totally painting you into a corner for the third book. It's really helpful to keep to keep track of them. And also kind of keep an open mind and kind of think about the future when you're writing, a certain book, not to kind of close off avenues.
Oh, I've actually had to sit down and do architectural drawings of places so that I know where the doors are, where the stairs are, maps, exactly.
Yep.
To know where all of that stuff is, because you get halfway through a novel and you go, was that there before?
Right.
And you go back and go, well, no, actually it wasn't. It was over here. Okay. Shit.
Even if you just are inventing a house.
Yeah. Just inventing a house.
You have to know.
Right. It's that internal consistency again, So you're writing an action sequence or something. You have to know exactly where this thing's, and, you don't want, you're not going to convey the architectural drawing in verbiage to the reader, but you're going to know so that you're not contradicting yourself.
Because if your character is trying to escape, you're not going to stop and say, well, there's a door next to the laundry room and
that's
to
where the bathroom was.
Yeah, wait, you're not fooling anybody. Where were they going to the bathroom?
But things like color and texture, they have to be consistent. You do have it's a keeping track situation. Even if you're just doing the minimum.
Yeah,
right. Copy editors will save your ass in a lot of for a lot of that. But
when you're starting out, you
but
don't get it right.
Don't get to the point where the copy editor is saving your ass, because if they miss it, you're dead.
Yeah, and as careful as you are, the copy editor will be saving your ass.
Yeah, exactly.
It's also all about all the senses, not just what you see. It's what you feel, like you said, color and texture.
Smell.
It's also sounds and smells. Yeah,
which goes back to the beach feet.
I was
go
there.
Well, that's our sponsor.
Yeah, I was going to say that's
the sandy feeling and the peppermint smell.
Yeah, you can use that in Manhattan. I'm telling you, man, Bahama Jane.
So I wrote a scene that was sort of the end of a book type of scene, and I had to actually literally do what you did, which is to write that, and it happened on a stage in a theater. And I literally had to sit down and put down like you would normally do for a play. You do a floor plan, right?
Sure.
To sort of set out the play. I had to do a floor plan like I would normally do for a play, and it was like, because I had these entrances and exits, and I thought I got to figure out where they're coming from or where they're going, because of course you're right. If they pop in on the wrong side and later on, so it's a tricky game.
Yeah.
So it reminds me of when Rick Sordelay was on the show, and he was a fight choreographer, and he was kind of he talked about choreographing the same fight in the same play, but with all these different set designs, and how the fight came out differently in each one. I think it was a really kind of interesting example of the importance of setting and how things roll out.
Yeah, wait, one person. It came out differently. The other person won.
No.
It's like you don't have a chair here to fall on this time.
Yeah, no. He just decided. You know what? This time
you win.
That's right.
Yeah. No, that's not what he meant.
But it's interesting what you're saying, because of course that does change the fight itself. You can choreograph a fight, but if suddenly the fountain isn't it really a fountain, and it's over there, but it's not center stage.
Yep.
You know,
or there's mud,
shifts it, or there's mud
wind,
down, or there's wind. It all changes everything. So the reality of it, as you say, all it takes is one little piece of it to pull the reader out, and the reader's going, "Wait, that wouldn't happen."
And the other thing is, I mean, all these little details, they're all like little mini writing prompts too. So when you're writing, you know, the details of the setting that you've given yourself, they're going to stimulate ideas. They're going to give you, you know, ideas of how things can happen and how characters can react and different ways you can deepen the story.
Well, that's also true when you're doing research for a historical period, or you're doing research to project into a future or something like that. That kind of research gives you ideas for things that you wouldn't normally throw into the story.
Absolutely.
You find actual details that you can use. And
it's not just about saving your ass.
No, exactly.
There are people that say they start with setting.
Yeah.
I mean, I've talked to a number of them who say they always start with a sense of place, and that the place
I think that's mostly for
them.
tax write-offs.
Yeah, there you go.
Set this story
So
in
funny.
Paris in the springtime.
No, you'd be surprised
I
how
know.
many people do say that. It's not usually my where my head
I could
goes
totally
either.
see it though. I could totally see it.
But that includes mood. It includes the tone of the place. So it would be different at sunrise than in the middle of the night, and so on. And then think about Laurel and Hardy with setting. And with their ladder and stuff.
Again.
I know, I can't help it.
Don't do that.
I can't help it. I shouldn't do it in public. I'm going to sit on my hands.
Okay.
You shouldn't do that in public either.
But think about setting with them, about how they played with setting, with their taking a ladder and bumping it into everything. And
you got to give them props.
Yeah. Thank you.
Give an actor
He'll be here
props
all
and
week.
you'll be there for a week. Exactly right. Exactly right. You know, you said.
Who said what?
You said about tone.
I said
is it tone, setting,
mood.
You used the word
mood indigo.
So
where does that
we all sit here, you know, okay, you really have to set your mood and be really careful. How do you do that? With words. I mean, come on. I mean, your mood is very easy. You sort of slip in, you know, you're in a nice spot. I mean, I'm thinking we're sitting here we're talking at a table. We're at Kelly's house, and Kelly's table.
I know, it's a bad mood.
Creaks. So for some of you might have thought we were on a boat. Right, that creak. But how do you set the mood in bedrooms?
Well, it depends on the emotional state of the characters, what they're feeling, what they're going through. One writing exercise I do with students is I have them write about a room they actually know, completely neutral room. Okay, and just describe. All they do is describe the room, and then I say, okay, now describe that room from the point of view of somebody who's broken into it to steal something.
Right.
And I don't want to know about the thief, and I don't want to know about the crime, and I don't give a damn what they're stealing. I just want you to describe the room. Mm-hmm. How does that room change based on the mental state of the person seeing it? And then the third exercise, doing the same thing, and these are all like flash fiction exercises, is now do the room from the point of view of somebody who's just come there from burying the person they love the most in the world. How does the room description change? And that's really all you do, I think, to alter the setting, the place. It depends on the emotional context of the situation you're writing about.
You see things differently. You hear different things depending on the state, like Greg said.
So what you're really saying is that you need all those things in place before you can even attempt to build the setting. Because if you don't know what your character's state of mind is exactly, you can't really marry it together with the setting.
you can build the setting, but then you've got to come back to it from that character's point of view
and go, because of the mood of the setting.
And that's why, setting isn't just place, because a place can be several different settings at different times, different moods, different experiences of the character.
Where the character
is. Like there's a chair in the corner. In one situation, I'm going to go sit in that chair and cry. In another situation, I'm going to pick that chair up and kill the person who's coming after me. I mean, that chair can be anything you want it to be.
He did just gesture at my head.
I
want everyone to know.
I killed Kelly with the chair. It's your chair.
That's like saying what we said at the beginning, that it is a character in a sense because it interacts. Sometimes the setting will act on the character, not just the character perceiving the setting. So it interacts with the character, and that's, depending on what that interaction is how you're going to describe it.
Isn't there wasn't an Alfred Hitchcock piece that the woman had killed her husband using a a frozen lamb.
Oh, it's a Roald Dahl story.
Yeah, and they
Yes,
they invite in the cops.
She invites in the
She
cops,
feeds
and she's
them.
cooking
The leg of lamb.
The leg of lamb. So it's
That's
interesting
right.
because in
That's
that case, the point of view, the leg of lamb is a very different thing to her than it is to them.
Absolutely.
And they eat the evidence.
A wonderful story.
Yep.
Yeah.
He had it coming too, by the way.
He had it coming.
We were talking about character and exposition, and one of the other things that setting can really do is you can, one of the things that I tell the writers that I'm working with is that a character shouldn't think the things a character wouldn't think. So you don't have a character walk into a room and start thinking about the color of their eyes. You don't have them, walk into a room and start, I used to be a Marine, and then
I remember that
people
day. Yeah.
aren't reciting their resume while they're. But a lot of times, what you can do is if there's
change my book now.
If there's details about character you want to get across, you can put these environmental cues that will stimulate memories. It'll cause them to think about the things
Pictures on
you
the
want
wall.
to think. Yep.
Yeah,
And
anything like that. Yeah.
here's another thing about setting. That happens a lot in suspense books, which I tend to write. Why would the character go down into the basement when she knows there's something scary down there?
Yeah.
Or why would she run away from the bad guy, up into the attic? Why wouldn't she go out the back door? We often have characters interacting with the setting in a way that makes absolutely no sense.
Well,
they have to have a reason for how they...
That's like the
What
original,
they do
the original
with the
Alien
setting.
movie. Remember the original Alien movie?
Sure.
He walks into this room with all of these weird eggs. He doesn't leave. He continues to walk
Yes,
in.
right.
And then the egg opens.
Well, at
and he
that
sticks his
point-
face over the egg.
At that point, nothing's happened, though. He's just going, this is interesting.
But in Prometheus, it was
Yeah,
much
it was
worse.
stupid.
There, it's like
Oh, it
he's
was
like saying,
stupid.
"Coochie, coochie, coo,"
Yeah, exactly.
That was ridiculous.
Well, that's also the movie where the alien wakes up having been asleep. They've been sent there, and the alien wakes up having been asleep for however million years, and immediately starts punching people. And you're going, yeah, that's exactly what I'd do if I woke up after all this time. Boy, you wake up grumpy, don't you, man?
First, cup of coffee.
Yeah, first, exactly.
If we learn nothing
You
from
don't
Austin
at
Powers-
least ask these people where the bathroom is. That's the least you could do. I'll be right back and beat you up, but first I gotta go take a whiz.
Could take a minute.
Yeah.
Any as we're going on here, any last thoughts, ideas
Oh, we've had a lot
to
of last
share
thoughts, I think. Yeah.
about setting?
I do think it's interesting for people starting out to experiment a little bit before they start, and to think about, should I set it here? Should I set it here? Should I set it here? If and to not necessarily just lock into the first thing that occurs to them,
Yeah.
because
It's worth experimenting.
it's worth experimenting and imagining it in another city or another country or another time. Absolutely, it might be more interesting. It might give it some texture and contrast.
I would also say that even if you're setting it somewhere in a place that you know very, very well and in contemporary time, do your research. Go to the places that you're writing about, because you'll be amazed at the kind of observations that you come away with when you study a place, when you scout it as a setting.
You don't know it as well as you think you do.
Do not know it as well as you think.
That can be the danger, is you know it so well that you actually don't know
see
it.
it.
Right.
Yeah.
And also, I mean, just, apart from anything else, memory is so malleable that, you can fill in all sorts of details that aren't there.
And you're also allowed to lie.
Well, that's a tricky thing. And I've mixed real settings and fictitious settings in several books. And it's tricky.
It is tricky. Yeah. Like, how far can you take it before you're going to get in trouble? And where do you, even if you have your overall setting, another thing that you want to think about when you're starting is exactly which part of that setting. Why are you starting in that part of the setting? What action are you putting where? Why is your character where they are?
Well, that goes back to why are you starting your story where you're starting it?
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
It's not just when.
That's a whole other topic.
And no coffee shops.
No coffee shops.
No coffee shops.
Ever?
None.
Not at the beginning.
No.
Not at the beginning.
Okay, fair. So we don't start over coffee. Even though we've just woken up for 1,000 years, we have to pee and we need a cup of coffee.
That's why he's beating them up.
Fair enough.
That's right.
All right. Well, I think that's it. I think we're done with setting now. We're moving on. Thank you. Yay.
Yay!
All right.
What evil lurks in the heart of Don Mondo? Only Chucky the Buddha, the enforcer of the Mondo Mafia, knows. Join them each week on the Mondo Method podcast as Chuck tries to get Don Mondo to reveal what is best in life and where he hid the bodies. Oh, they also talk about writing and being professional authors. The Mondo Method podcast with Armand Rosamilia and Chuck Buddha, weekly, wherever you find your podcasts.
This has been a presentation of the Project Entertainment Network.